Hey guys, this is Greg from 3 Life Wellness. And as you can see, I'm in my kitchen and I have raided my pantry and have put some food items out here for you. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to talk to you guys about how we can classify foods. So many different ways to think about foods from a macronutrient, micronutrient standpoint, and from organic and inorganic and genetically modified and all this other stuff out there. And all of that's good to learn and understand. 100 years ago, foods weren't processed so much. Most of it was grown off from farms or whether they're animals or plants, and basically minimally processed and put on our dinner plates at home. But today it's a different story. There's a lot of food companies, big food companies that are making a lot of packaged goods. So these industries will produce more foods that are hyper palatable meaning that they really taste good to us and they hit the dopamine centers of our brain and we want more of it. And that's what the food companies want, is they want you to buy more food, which means we wind up consuming a lot more sugars and other types of byproducts and additives that really are not good for us in the long term and can harm us greatly if we're not careful. And in fact, about 70% of the U.S. adult and child population now is eating 60 to 70% of ultra-processed foods and those high-end carbohydrates and lots of sugars. So it can be devastating for your health. And so what we need to do is just be wary of that and cut down on these ultra-processed foods. So what am I saying? So this classification system that it was created in Brazil is called the NOVA classification. And it is basically 4 levels of processed foods. And I've got these 4 levels displayed in front of you today. NOVA classifications 1 through 4. Here is 1. Here is group 2. Here is group 3 and group 4. And as these numbers go up, what you're going to find is that we're talking about the difference between starting with basically a whole food and moving our way up to an ultra-processed food, which is a food that is basically we cannot manufacture in our own kitchens. It's done through a whole bunch of science and a whole bunch of chemicals and ingredients in order to make food last longer and taste better. So anyway, let's talk first about NOVA 1, the classification. NOVA classification 1 is whole or unprocessed or minimally processed foods. So here's where you're going to see, obviously, like bananas and peanuts and this tomato, completely unprocessed, other than the fact that it was taken off of the plant and delivered. So minimally processed foods would be something like the bacons and these carrots, for instance, which don't come in their original carrot form, but are basically bite-sized. The grains here that you see as well, the lentils, beans, and seeds like that. Those are the minimally processed foods. Then we go to the next step here, which is culinary processing, or processed foods for culinary use. So this is where you begin to do a lot more refining and milling and pressing in order to produce ingredients basically for the kitchen. So here you'll see like the olive oils that were pressed. You're going to see sugar, cocoa, butters, honeys. So anything that has been extracted that is still whole and doesn't contain other types of ingredients is in this category here, or this classification, NOVA 2, Group 2. So here is NOVA classification 3. So Group 3 will contain elements from Group 1, like let's say almonds or peaches or peanuts. And it's just that it's going to be provided in a way that it's going to add value, to add to the palatability of the product, grapes and wine. So this is a classification 3. So it's still mostly the food product, but it has went through a couple of degrees of processing. Now, last and most important to point out is the NOVA classification 4. So this is the ultra-processed foods that basically are not produced at all in the kitchen, have minimal original product, some of the original product, but minimal, and has a lot more chemicals in it. And again, these are chemicals done for shelf life, for taste and texture. In other words, make it hyper palatable for us to eat. The problem is that a lot of these foods are really not good for us, and we need to be very careful with ultra processed foods. So for instance, how about we just take a look at a couple of differences right here real quick. Here's group 3, and down there you're going to see a biscuit, and that is definitely a processed food for sure, right? It's got a lot of flours and other ingredients in order to create the biscuit. Now the difference between this biscuit and this bread is that this was done in a local bakery, and it's all natural ingredients prepared and out the door. This is done through a factory, and it needs to have shelf life. It's going to sit on a shelf in a grocery store. So there's a lot more elements to this than there are here that are unnatural. Not saying that this is necessarily bad. This is a 12 grain whole grain bread. So it is a whole grain as opposed to a white bread, but still it's high in carbohydrate value, and it is something that should be limited in your diet. Also, the difference between classifications, like say meats, for instance, the bacon, or let's say you had steak here in group 1, and in here, you might say that if you were to have meats in this particular category, it would be something like more like deli meats that would be put together. Classification 4 now is actually taking meats like you see here with corned beef hash and with the Spam, and actually just stripping out a lot of the healthier whole meats and creating something completely different. So in wrapping this up, you guys, I think the NOVA classification system is a great, easy system. You only have to figure out 4 different levels of processing, and it makes you aware of the different types of processing that's going on. And as you can see, going from healthy to less healthy foods, you can determine for yourself mentally, hey, what classification is this type of food? And maybe I should think about going from eating 70% ultra processed foods to maybe taking it down to 60, 50, 40, 30%. So we're lowering this level of food that can cost you health-wise, and taking it over much more towards this category, category 1, which is the whole foods, or even category 3, which is okay, but we still want to watch, say, the amounts of sugars that might be in our food. So I find this as a great system, and I think you guys will too. And so I'll pop in a link that talks about the classification system to get you started. Highly recommend it. And I think that this is a great tip for you in your buying decisions when you go to the grocery store.